Good morning and welcome to the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee. Could I have apologies in order of business?
Apologies from Councillor Pottinger on the order of business as per the agenda.
Are there any declarations of interest? No. Okay, we have the minutes of the meeting for approval of the 3rd of June. And B, from the 3rd of June in the afternoon. Is there any matters arising? Are we happy with the correct record? Okay, thank you. Move on to item 5, HMICS Independent Assurance Review and Police Handling. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to advise the Committee of the current consultation by HMICS on the review of police call handling, and the 3 objectives of the process that they're looking at are in the appended HMICS letter. All councillors have received prior notification from a circular that I'd sent round. However, the timescale for the online option closing on the 23rd has been extended in terms of acceptance of submissions from local authorities into September. The Cabinet Secretary had instructed the Inspectorate to review the call handling process, and they have requested elected members' views and experience in police contact. They will accept submissions from local authorities into September, and that's based on the 4 questions which are again in the appended letter, and the committee are invited to consider whether a collective submission can be made by Midlothian Council to the Inspectorate of Constabulary, which we are required to do by the 30th of this month. Thank you. Thanks,
Kevin. Kevin, in your paper you're saying that they will take submissions from local authorities. Is that individual local councillors or only as a collective?
No, certainly the approach on the online submission has been by individuals if appropriate, and similarly from local authorities they would take it either from the collective corporate body of the council or indeed whether it was to be a submission from the respective groups separately.
Okay, I'm not sure whether or not we would get consensus for a collective response. There are 4 direct questions, and I would suppose that would vary from ward to ward rather than across the political divide. I'll throw it open to members. I personally myself have had several complaints regarding the 101 and indeed the 999. And in fact, even just this morning, I had a local Mayfield resident telling me they dialled 999 last night with a group of youths outside their house, and it took the police 2 hours to attend because they were attending to another more serious problem. And I'll pass that to Kenny at a later stage today. However, can I ask other members for their experiences? Joe?
I've had absolutely no complaints whatsoever about police calls. Nobody's come to me to see me to say they've had problems with contacting the police.
Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I concur with yourself, Derek. But mainly relates to 101 calls, and I relayed this back to Kenny at the Safe Communities Board, that I have had a few people have said that for lower priority crimes tends to be parking issues and attempted break-ins, things like that, that there's been a long wait before the police attend, and also some antisocial behaviour issues, which, as you know, have occurred at a few locations in Bonnyrigg, that by the time the police come, the issue is gone, and so it's very difficult, therefore, to be able to follow it up.
Thanks. Yeah, similar to Councillor Baxter's experience, I had residents, the complaint that sticks in my mind is somebody who had an ongoing sort of neighbour antisocial behaviour problem, and they saw their neighbour in a situation that they felt was a breach of bail conditions and phoned 101 to ask the police to attend, but such was the delay in the police coming out that they weren't able to see the individual allegedly in breach of their bail, and so nothing was able to be done. And of course, as we know as councillors, when there's a neighbour dispute with these kinds of things, that just delays the process and draws the whole thing out. But it was quite disappointing that if somebody was, you know, in breach of bail, which is meant to be something that's enforced reasonably rigorously, that there was no assets turning up. And I suppose that's distinct from the actual call handling, maybe, because the problem wasn't with the people they spoke to at 101 or anything like that. The problem was once the call was concluded, simply nothing happened quick enough.
I haven't had anything specific recently. I have had a number of issues in the past, but it seems that I think sorry, I've lost the train of thought.
Joe.
Convener, it seems to me that people seem to believe that in the past the police were right at their doors as soon as they picked up the phone. That's nonsense. I mean, I think this shows that the scrutiny of the police today, as it is today, with a single force, highlights individual areas throughout the country. And this then gets reported as the police being failing in their duties. They didn't fail any less than they did before in responding to 999 calls.
I think there's a few folk who disagree with you on that. Jim?
So the point I was going to make was that what I have had an issue with recently is people who have had fairly minor, in the bigger picture of things, issues to report where the issue was still ongoing. And it's about the appropriateness of where to call. Now, people in that circumstance will sometimes dial 101, and it'll take ages for anything to happen. And I've always been told, certainly by the police, to say to people, you know, if somebody is doing something and they're there at the time and there's a potential of the police actually catching them in the act, then they should be dialing 999. So there are issues in terms of, you know, which number to use at what time. And I think we need to get across to people that where there is an ongoing issue and it's causing people concern, they need the police there immediately, that they should be dialing 999.
Okay. Ian?
And so just to go back to Joe's comments there, my understanding is that we're supposed to be responding in respect of any issues and deficiencies, not whether it's improved or deteriorated. Is that the case?
Yeah, the 4 questions are actually set out. I understand this is perhaps coming from the tragedy, the 999 call, or the car going off the road, and the 2 young people dying as a result of this. And I think this is the police just trying to find out if there is a wider problem across the board. And I've got to say, for what I'm hearing here and for what I'm hearing publicly, I'm not actually sure whether the call handling part is actually the main problem, or whether how quickly the police respond when you're actually contacting them. And I think one of the points that just when Kenny was talking about antisocial behaviour, it's how calls are logged and what they're logged as. I mean, people call neighbour disputes and that antisocial behaviour. Most of the time they're anything but. They're actually criminal acts. But yet they're being logged as antisocial behaviour. If there's somebody trying to kick your front door and to kick your teeth in, it's no antisocial behaviour. It's an actual criminal act. But some of these things are being logged as antisocial behaviour incidents when they really shouldn't be. And I think certainly for the public, for me, I think it's more about the attendance time. And I think if you're dialing 999, while I accept part of what Joe's saying is you've never got the police there unless you were lucky within 2 or 3 minutes. You did expect them to come in a reasonable time. Now I'm afraid to say we're back to where we were, I think, in 1999, where it's quite often taken the police far too long to attend to get to places. So I'm not actually sure, unless that comes in with the question 4 on this, as to why we would respond. And as I say, I'm not actually sure whether we can actually come to an agreement on a collective response, because Joe seemingly has a completely different view, and that could quite simply be that Pennycook isn't experiencing the problems that other places are experiencing. We have been so far up the road, there might be dedicated police in that area where the likes, say, Bonnyrigg, Loanheed and that are perhaps sharing police resources.
Given that there's likely to be, you know, as you say, individual views, how would we, Kevin, formulate a response as a collective? How would the council formulate a response, given that I don't think we've got a council meeting before the end of this period?
I don't think there is. Certainly what I would suggest, clearly there isn't. The prospect, I think, of a collective response, and it may be that members wish to do that as a group. It was brought forward, whilst there's not a requirement to make a response, certainly the Inspectorate, which is separate from Police Scotland, were keen to get that. And I thought clearly with the situation that we have with Bilston call centre that it may be of interest for members to make one. But it can be done separately as the administration and opposition groups. And indeed, I've had a separate response from Councillor Baxter from the initial circular that I put round elected members and a couple of others since as well. So we can certainly formulate separate responses with the divergent views that there are.
Are we happy just to take it as back to individual groups or elected members? Okay, Kevin, thank you. Okay, item 6 is elected members' scrutiny activity and Audit Scotland risk assessment.
Thank you, Chair. This report follows the Audit Scotland assessment of housing benefits in our revenue services at September of 2014. This was reported separately at that time to Cabinet, Audit Committee and Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee. An improvement plan was submitted to Audit Scotland on the 11 risk recommendations that had come forward as a consequence of that inspection. And in section 2 of your report, the extract from paragraphs number 24 and 25 from the Audit Scotland report were of concern to members in Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee, and they'd requested information on the timeline of the reporting to Cabinet and PRS Committee in the loss of the subsidy issue, which has been highlighted by Audit Scotland on page 16 of your papers today. That was as a consequence that additional subsidy for local authority error and administrative delay in overpayments led to us losing what could have been achieved of £123,599. That was reported at that time. In terms of sections 3 and 4 of the report, which relate to scrutiny and the use of performance indicators, this is in terms of our scrutiny practice and performance, which is to outline the required process which can be evidenced for audit and regulation by both me and my colleagues to external regulators, rather than to be seen as patronising to members. Indeed, the measure which is indicated here is no longer reported to you quarterly. It's not in today's quarterly performance from me because it is no longer an issue. We are well within our threshold performance for subsidy on error and administrative delay. Consequently, committee is recommended to note the reported scrutiny activity which did take place by the then Head of Customer Services back in quarters 2, 3 and 4 of 2013, and to consider the updated current improvement plan which is attached for information, and indeed a number of those indicators are completed and others are on target for where they should be at this point in the improvement plan. Thank you.
Any questions? I've got to say that guy with his jog down the stairs is actually getting his timing spot on, isn't he? Any questions or comments for Kevin? Jim?
I mean, we asked for this when we were kind of stung by the criticism, and the way that the report was worded kind of suggests that it was almost this committee's, fault for this issue happening. And while we all take our collective responsibility seriously, I think what we were interested in at the time was the timeline, who knew what when. And to be honest, I've read this several times and I'm not sure I'm clear as to who knew what when. You're right, Derek. Who knew what when. It's suggested here that it was not reported as an emerging challenge quarter 2. Can you maybe just go a wee bit more into that, Kevin, and explain that part of it, please?
Yes, certainly in terms of that paragraph, which is the third last on page 16 of your papers, what I'd found, and indeed I've got the evidence of that time with me if required, is that the subsidy claim measure wasn't reported to you in quarter 1, either through Cabinet or PRS. It was reported in quarter 2. It was within the performance measures, the covalent model that is provided to you. It wasn't headlined, as I would term it, in the covering report as a challenge. So if I was going to make any distinction, it may be that and if I use the analogy of new buyers, I'm quite well aware members are well versed in what's happening there, but it's always on my front page in terms of highlighting an issue and a challenge to you. So if there was anything in terms of learning for me as an officer from what had been reported and how that was reported, it was to make sure that was front and centre in terms of being reported to you. It was certainly within the measures, within the covalence measures that are reported to you over quarters 2, 3 and 4 of 13-14. But as I say, it wasn't put front and centre as an emergent challenge within the summary reports that are provided to members. And that's maybe what I'm saying in a long-winded way in that paragraph to you.
I mean, there's a couple of things for us. I mean, certainly for your side of the table, one of the problems that might have occurred, and it doesn't look like it did, was normally each of us have an individual role and look deeply, and mine would be finance. Unfortunate for me, that day I was off. But even having looked back on it, I'm not sure with a bland statement like off target whether I would have picked up the seriousness of what was off target and what needed to be done. Now, it seems obviously that wasn't highlighted to either the Cabinet or the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee. How do we make sure that these things didn't happen again? As you say, Kevin, how do we make sure they are on the front page? Because effectively it's the officer who is heading up that problem that is responsible for making sure it's on the front page. How do we make sure that it's there from now on, and not just in that, in every other area?
Perhaps appropriate for me to answer that one, Chair. I mean, there is a process we go through within the directorates and then coming up to the Chief Executive, and so I review all these quarterly, monthly reports. And part of my role is of course, the challenge round about the report to ensure that, and sometimes a robust discussion with heads of service about, what the critical issues are that we need to bring to members' attention. And I think, and I hope that generally that's something that's done fairly well, partly because the heads of service themselves are, keen to ensure that the right things are highlighted to members. And as I say, that there's then a role for challenge for me as well in ensuring that's the case. So I think it's difficult to kind of give a cast iron guarantee on that. But I do think that the approach we take in terms of the work done by the heads of service within the directorates initially, and then the challenge process through me before these papers are finalised and come up to Cabinet and PRS committee, gives us the best possible prospect of ensuring the right things are being highlighted, either positives or indeed weaknesses and challenges which need to be brought to members' attention.
I mean, certainly for the elected members' prospect, for us, from here, being the opposition and lead area in scrutiny, the thing that we have learnt from this is that each role will have a shadow role as well, so as to make sure that in the event that there is an elected member who would normally be covering that subject, that there is somebody else there going to cover it. Now, that's something that we've acted on ourselves. But as I say, having read through the papers, would I have spotted it was off target? Yeah. Would I have actually been looking and thinking, right, there's a serious problem? The fact that it wasn't highlighted at all that I could see, I'm not sure that it would have made any difference whether I had been there or no. In fact, I just don't think it would have. Is there anything else any members want to raise in this? Are we happy with the updated improvement plan? No. Okay. Thank you. Item 7A is health and social care, customer and housing services. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of Q1, strategic outcomes, we've had registrar services transferred into customer and housing services from the 1st of April in the first quarter. We're taking the opportunity to review that service as part of our wholesale customer services review, and indeed we're applying some of the lean systems work that we've done previously in housing and elsewhere now in customer services to registrars. and that follows on from the initial phase that we've reported previously of profiling customers and how that's informing our redesign and channel shift to access and delivery of services. In that vein, the Customer Hub, which we've reported previously, has been launched a week past Monday. In fact, that's been delivering services in the locality in Mayfield now. The bibliotherapy service has had further funding awarded to it, and that's allowed us to extend the existing project, so it will continue the well-received work that it has delivered on, but also extend that beyond the library base that it sits in. And indeed, it featured this week on the BBC Radio Scotland Culture Show as part of the work that they were doing during the course of the festival. In community safety, the Safer Communities Board is incorporating the Reducing Reoffending Partnership, the shadow arrangements for that, as the Community Justice Authorities are disestablished by 2017, and work has been ongoing through Q1 and indeed continues through to 2017 to extend the remit and the participation of community partners as well as ourselves as statutory partners. In revenues, we've seen the increasing movement through channel shift again, through transactions and contacts and payments and revenues, and also in libraries over the first quarter. In housing services, for the first quarter, the submission of the annual social housing charter was completed on time through the new arrangements for regulation and inspection. There were some follow-ups from that, not in a negative way. These were thematics that were being applied across the country on homeless decisions, on complaints handling, and on decision times being made for homelessness, and we have returned those in turn. And indeed, we participated in a thematic last week in terms of rent setting policy, because we're in the midst of reviewing that, and indeed a paper will come up to Cabinet and Council before the year end. In housing strategy, we have continued with the new build developments in Pennycook, which have indeed now been completed in the current quarter. In the first quarter, those were being allocated and have since been let over the summer period. In terms of challenges, new buyers has remained a challenge in the first quarter, but pleased to report that we have, as of yesterday, no remaining households and new buyers. All the 64 tenancies have been relocated to alternative housing, and we move on into the next phase for demolition and redevelopment, as indeed was outlined at a recent seminar to elected members. In welfare reform, universal credit continues to be rolled out as it was from the first quarter. The impact of that has not been as severe as yet as was anticipated. The estimated numbers that we were advised of from DWP were expected at this stage to be 390 cases. We've actually got 50. Within those 50, there are 42 that have housing costs. The others will subsequently be living with parents or some other arrangement. And within those 42, we've requested direct payment for 30 as they have come into universal credit with rent arrears already. In terms of community safety, as we've indicated, there is the Community Justice Authority changes, and we're awaiting further guidance from Scottish Government about implementation, because that will span criminal justice and our community safety teams in terms of how we implement and operate that. But we are reassured from the existing CGA that we are well ahead in the planning and implementation without any guidance currently being provided. And in antisocial behaviour, just to note, in terms of the increase through Q1 in incidences of vandalism, fire-raising and youth calls, which, from analysis of those trends, are largely as a result of alcohol consumption. And indeed, there is a joint licensing board and licensing forum event to take place within the next 6 weeks, I understand. In terms of highlighting to members those areas which are off target, on the subsequent pages, this is in respect of complaints, and as indicated there, we had a failure point in the stage 1 complaints, where one had been misappropriated. It was into the wrong category, and by the time the service manager was aware of it, the expiry date had passed. So that was a system fault which we have addressed within this service. And else is off target? Sickness is in respect of one remaining case out of 3 in the first quarter, who's due to return to work within the current month. And the individual PIs are listed as we have 16 on target out of 23. And there are one relates to libraries, sorry, I apologise, 4 relate to libraries, 4 to housing, and 1 to revenues, which are currently off target.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Just referring back to the average time in working days to respond to 2 complaints at stage 2 on page 30. It seems a remarkable increase. 5 for the first quarter of last year, 25 this year, which is more than the total for the whole of last year. That, I can understand a slight increase, and given the incident you referred to, but it just seems incredible increase. Can you maybe explain that a bit further?
In terms of the analysis of complaints, I don't have the breakdown across each service as yet. That's still work that's going on through the contact centre, because we were just reflecting on that yesterday in preparation for today, so I don't have that detail. But certainly I know in terms of comparison of this point last year, the systems set up for complaints, because it's something that was evident in the quarter 4 reporting here of the year end, did not match the service structure changes that had come from the management review. So there is an anomaly as a result of that, but I need to come back to you with further detail about what the trend analysis tells us once that's available.
Thanks. I'm more concerned about the future. If we've identified the problem and we're addressing it, and we're confident that this is going to come down, I'm happy with that commitment.
Yes, I can certainly assure you of that, but as I say, in terms of the miscategorisation of the complaint that we are aware of, yes.
Any other questions for Kevin on this? Jim?
Kevin, on page 27, in the first page, the revenue service channel shift transactions are increasing. Do we have any kind of level of detail on that? And when you say channel shift transactions, are you talking about, I suppose, verbal transactions or financial transactions? Are we starting to see more people paying for things online, and if so, how significant an increase?
Yes, it's in terms of payment transactions, certainly there are more. There's an increase in the direct debits, which are done online. We're at 73% for revenues, which is at the top end in terms of comparison with our peers. There's a month-on-month increase in terms of the telephone line transactions as well as the online transactions, because there's 24/7 access to those, and we're seeing, as a consequence, people are coming in and making use of those at their convenience rather than when we're open. So yes, I can give you particular numbers if you require those offline, but it's certainly across transactions is where the significant change is taking place.
Okay. Any other questions for Kevin? Kevin, could I just ask for a wee bit of details on page 38, provide affordable housing through direct provision and partnership working? We seem to be talking there about major electrical work to one property taking 280 days. Is this a serious problem for us, or is this just a sort of one-off? I can see that it's talking about the average relate times being about 49 days. But I mean, how serious a problem is this? I mean, I take it are we talking about one of your council houses, or is this a private let? And if it is, what kind of electrical work could take 280 days? And why would we need the electricity board, for want of another word, whoever they are, to be involved in that?
Yes, certainly that is in relation to Council House rather than any other tenure, and it's been in terms of where we have refurbishment work going on. We would rewire a house where that's been missed out of a programme because we've not had access because the tenant's elderly, infirm, or just doesn't provide us with access, and we've not enforced that, then we take the opportunity when the property becomes void again, for whatever reason, to go in and then do that work. But what we've been finding as a consequence of that, if it's not part of a programme that we've been able to alert the utility companies to, so it's part of their work planning process, that they know we're going to do so many upgrades to a property, or indeed the new builds, because they need to be connected to the mains, that we have difficulties in them coming back and connecting those properties, because they need to install the meter. It's not the electrical installation. Our guys, our contractors are doing that. It's the metering and having that put onto the grid, literally, that we're finding those problems. But that's not particular to Midlothian, as we've referenced there. That is occurring across the country, and it's something that's been escalated both through APSE in terms of my property colleagues, but also through COSLA as well, and housing forums, because it is having an impact that the property can't then be certified as being safe and can't be operated, and we can't let it for somebody then to move into. So this is quite a significant impact that it's had here. We've had others to a lesser degree, but a similar problem, which is why, as I say, it's been taken through national forums.
Okay, thank you. Ian?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. You just actually reminded me of something else, which, in the context of new built houses, something I've been pressing for private developments is the implementation of fibre to the premises for broadband. Now, when I spoke to Openreach, they said that they were prepared to install fibre to the premises at the same cost as copper to the premises for any development of over 25 houses. Are we following this up for our own council house stock?
We certainly look at those opportunities in our own new build development. In terms of refurbishment, I don't have that detail. Gary might be able to address that later today for you. But yes, at the outset of a new build development, yes, we do.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, right. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, move on to item B, adult social care.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Take you through some of the highlights on the report. If we look at substance misuse service, would want to highlight some of the work that's going on to develop the recovery hub. There's been a significant piece of work that's been undertaken by MELDAP, certainly to do a review in terms of a step change of the way we deliver services to ensure that actually we've got a real focus on recovery for people who are experiencing substance misuse and alcohol issues. And there's a small core group that's now really looking at how we develop local resources for people with a real focus on recovery. Within May, there was a shadow board visit from the Health and Social Care Partnership to the Horizons Cafe, which was a really successful visit and really highlighted some of the work that was going on already within Midlothian to make that step change towards a recovery model, and certainly would be happy to arrange visits for any of the members who weren't part of that if they're interested in looking at some of the work that's going on around recovery in the area. Within mental health, Kevin's already spoken about the bibliotherapy service and the work that was going on recently, but it's had a really significant impact for those people who are experiencing mental health issues in our area. It fits with the direction, again, both in terms of recovery and self-help that we're delivering within mental health services. And I think throughout a lot of the work we're doing, that recovery type-based approach and having peer support is really central to a lot of the work that we're delivering in that community-based approach. We are developing community outreach services across the area. Bonnyrigg has often been that centre for a lot of the mental health services, with the Orchard Centre being based there, but it's really looking at ensuring that we're delivering the appropriate supports right in the heart of all of the communities across Midlothian, and that's a real focus again across a number of the different areas. Integration is moving forward. The first formal meeting of the Integrated Joint Board was held on the 20th of August. I was thinking what date it was. I was going to say last week, but I was on holiday last week, so it definitely wasn't then. Was held, and that's that first stage in where we're going. There's good work going on with regard to the strategic plan, commissioning plan at this point in time, and certainly I believe that that's been circulated for comment and would really look for any support that we can get in terms of delivering that. That is going to be the direction of travel for us for the next 3 years, and it's it's the starting point of that real conversation and engagement with our communities to look at how we deliver services as we're moving forward. As part of that, we'd held a public event in Pennycook on the 27th of May, where over 80 people attended, which was again looking at how we deliver services for older people and part of that engagement process in terms of how we shape the changes that we're making moving forward. Merit, which is our Midlothian Enhanced Rapid Response and Intervention team, part of that is our hospital at home service, which has advanced nurse practitioners and a geriatrician that are working in the community and is very much about how we prevent people going into hospital and how we bring people out much sooner. And they're now responding to about 15 new referrals a month, and it's been seen as a really positive. Certainly the geriatrician also is, she works with us part-time, but she's based in Liberton. She's so confident about the services that we're providing within Midlothian for older people that actually her ward in the Liberton Hospital has no Midlothian patients. She's really quick to get them discharged because she is really confident about the types of service that we deliver locally for people. We also held a public event in June around physical disabilities and the work that came out of that. It was a really well-attended event, and there were some new faces around the table. Often you end up with the same people at consultation events on a regular basis, but there were some new faces around the table, and that's a good way for us to shape our new action plan for physical disabilities and the way forward. And work has started on site for the 12-person core and cluster development for learning disabilities on the old John Chant Centre site. And that's moving forward, and we hope that that will be completed for us to begin the work for moving people in autumn to sort of winter time next year. So that's all progressing at this point in time. Work is now ongoing with some of the families of the people that we hope will move into that, and looking at what the care model will look like around that. So it's a big programme of work over the next 12 to 18 months to get that ready to go. Kevin competed with that, I'm not sure I can. In terms of challenges, certainly absence had been a significant challenge for us in the last year. Would want to highlight in terms of the performance stats that we're actually on target for this year. And it had been a particular issue with a new buyer's care home, and we've actually seen the sickness absence there reduce over 75% over the last 12-month period, and that has been down primarily to the managers within that service really robustly managing and using the policies that we have available, and some great support from our HR colleagues to support us through that, and in part down to some of that culture shift that we've been doing within new buyers, so that actually there's been that challenge from colleagues as well about people where they think that some people are maybe not always off genuinely for reasons, but that's been a big shift for us in new buyers and something that would want to recognise the hard work that's been going on there. We have one large-scale investigation undertaken at this point in time around a residential unit within, it's for learning disabilities, 2 6-people units within Dalkeith. That's been closely managed and monitored and has been over this quarter. We are hoping that we'll be able to close that down fairly quickly. Again, it was predominantly around the management issues and not having clear leadership within that unit, which was causing us a level of concern. The only other performance indicator that I'd want to highlight for you is actually on page 57 of the document, which is around our delayed discharge targets. One of the ones you can see is on target, which is we maintain at 0 the number of patients delayed, which is a really significant, it is a real challenge for us across Scotland to meet the delayed discharge target. The one that we're off target for is maintaining people at 72 hours after census date. Now, that isn't a nationally measured target at this point in time, but it is what the government is looking for us to reach within the next 3-year period. And actually, we want to be measuring ourselves against that now so we can begin to see how we're aiming and heading towards that challenge as we move forward. But that is just something that we're setting for us as a really hard challenge at this point in time. But nationally, we're being measured against the 2 weeks, which we are on target for. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Ian?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and speak above the noise. One demand that we've been led to believe is increasing over time is that for support for dementia sufferers. I was very surprised to hear a national report, I think it might be UK-wide, a week or 2 back, which said that in actual fact dementia is not increasing, but has actually dropped a small amount over the last few, it might have been decades or whatever. What's your own view from somebody at the coalface, as it were? Because you must know what the general trend is, at least locally.
That isn't our experience locally, certainly, and the integrated dementia team that we developed certainly isn't feeling that they're seeing any decline in the amount of work that's heading their way, or the complexity of the type of work that's heading their way as well, in terms of supporting people in their own home for longer and how that is. I didn't highlight it, but it is on the front page that actually we've, through the integrated care fund that came through, we have funded an additional post-diagnostic support worker. One of the key priorities is that within that first year of someone's diagnosis that you offer some intensive level of support, because often it's around that planning in that first year about how you, it's that anticipatory care planning, so what do I want moving forward, and getting the right information at the right time for that person and for the carers around that. Some of that might be about applying for power of attorney, so we've got a power of attorney campaign going on, so at the point that someone's in hospital or isn't able to make decisions for them, they've already made some of those choices early on about who they would like to support them at that point in time. So there's a real emphasis for us in that post-diagnostic, that first year after diagnosis, to offer support. But at this point in time, certainly we're not seeing a slowdown or a dip in the number of the amount of work or the prevalence of dementia in our area.
I was going to say the prevalence is the important thing, because I think people are far more aware of the issue, and so the tasks that you're talking about, the early stage support, is very important, and I'm very pleased to see that we're introducing that more. But this is something that we're possibly doing because the awareness is increasing and the feeling that we're going to have a lot more cases. But you're saying that the actual number of cases themselves is certainly not declining.
Not at this point in time, certainly. I mean, obviously we'll need to track that over a period of time, and we may see a slowing, but as yet, no, we've not seen that in our area.
Thank you. Any other questions on this issue? Okay, could I just ask you, the one that is maintaining at zero, the number of patients delayed for more than 72 hours, it's probably a question I'm looking for is it possible to break that sort of down a bit further to sort of give us an idea of how many patients have been delayed because we couldn't get the right care packages in, or how many were delayed because, for example, family members were absent and we couldn't get decisions made. You know, what can we break it down to where there's been a failing on the service that we're looking to provide compared to we simply just couldn't?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have that breakdown of information, so would be able to provide that. I would say the 72-hour target is going to be extremely challenging. If you ignore whether or not we have the services available for people to move into, particularly if someone's moving into long-term care from hospital, 3 days to know that moving into care is the right thing for you, have your family visit the care homes in your local area to see that they're the right home for you and that it's convenient for family to visit and that they think the care that's being provided is appropriate. 3 days isn't very long to do some of that. 72 hours is going to be extremely challenging when it comes in because of supporting and enabling people to make the right choices for them in their life. 3 days isn't very much. So we're going to have to think really quite creatively in terms of how we can meet those targets but still get the best outcomes for people in the right way and time for them and their families. So we are reviewing how we use our intermediate care facility at Highbank, for example. Is it appropriate for people actually to have most of their assessments done in that type of facility? Because actually it's an easier facility for us to assess. Hospital isn't a good place to assess people because it's so far removed from what a homely environment can be. But with the right sort of rehab and support, we could do the assessment in a better way. So actually we may be able to support people much better either both in the community or in hospital. So it's a challenging target for us to meet, and we are going to have to think creatively about how we meet some of those targets. But in terms of breakdown of what the failures might be, certainly we have that, and I'm happy to provide that on a monthly basis if that's required. I can include that within the notes here to say what the failures were, either in terms of care home, care at home, family issues or whatever that might be. I can make sure that's included in more detail in the note moving forward.
Yeah, I think it would certainly be helpful for myself because it is going to be a very hard target to get, and I think as long as we are working creatively, if we are looking at different ways of making sure, you talked about preempting dementia and decisions being taken before. Again, it's maybe something we need to look at as people start to get more elderly and frail, and that's somebody needing to address that. However, I'm very much aware there's a lot of families who just will only want to face the kind of facts, but I think it's something we need to be trying to push so as when the time comes when somebody is in hospital, because I think we're all aware the longer they stay in hospital, the worse it is for people to move over. Is there any other questions, Jim?
Just on that one, you know, the fact that it is going to be such a challenging thing to achieve, all the more reason that I think we would want to know where there were areas that, you know, were totally with our control, you know, or where there were areas where, you know, additional resources might be required to focus on to resolve particular issues. So it would be helpful, I think, to have that kind of breakdown.
I mean, I'll include that next time, and might be a workshop of some kind at some point just to break down, to give people a bit more detail, because it might still require a level more discussion at some point, but happy to do that.
Okay, with that, are we happy to note the report? Okay, thank you. Now we move on to 7B, Education, Community and Economy, Children's Services. Mary.
Joan sends her apologies. She's currently sunning herself, so she's somewhere warmer than us. So this report for the first quarter, the emphasis is on prevention. You can see that we've reduced the numbers of children on the Child Protection Register, the number of looked after children and children in residential care. So that's all to do with the preventative work that's going on. And Joan and her team are reviewing all aspects of our service so that we can provide services which meet the needs of the community rather than us staff. The successes include the Family Resilience Project. We've had an external report on that, and what it showed was that the approach that we were using, the family resilience approach, was really positive and the families welcomed it. And we're now looking at taking another 3 families onto that service, but at a slightly lower level. We picked 3 families that were at the far end of the approach, and we're now taking people that are at the middle that we hope we can actually affect long-term change. Also, the residential services, you know that we've used Dalkeith House in a different way, and it was about not bringing youngsters into residential, but actually using the staff in the residential care to actually be working with the families in their homes, and that's proved very positive. So the first part of the report is all about the positives and all about prevention. The challenges are as outlined below. It's really the supporting children and young people with complex needs. So secure care, you know, costs us £250,000 per child per year, and we're off target in terms of the number of children that are in secure care, but it's the right thing for them. It's where they need to be. You know that our specialist placements can cost anything from £150,000 upwards, and I can leave here today and have to authorise a placement for a child. You know, so we're always balancing that risk for our children and young people. Whilst our figures in child protection and looked after are reducing, the workload hasn't reduced for staff, because doing the preventative work means you're preventing it getting to that level. So it's not reducing staff workload, but we're working in a different way, and people are much more confident about what we're doing. The other emerging challenge is the National Inquiry into Historical Abuse. We haven't had anything as yet. I saw a police report last week that they reckon that it's going to have a huge impact on police services, and it means us trawling through our records and things. We reported that to Council, so that remains an ongoing challenge for us. And sickness absence, again, across our services. You know, we are working hard to reduce sickness absence, but again, it remains a challenge for us in our services. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mary. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the figures on page 68, we've got a number of young people in secure residential placement and foster placement with the authority. It appears to be going the wrong way. I'm more concerned if foster placements outside the authority is creeping up again, because I know we did a lot of hard work and we brought that down and made significant savings there. Obviously we had a publicity campaign which seems to have ended, judging by the inside of buses. I don't see the posters anymore. But I wonder if that's maybe why that without having the publicity we're not getting recruitments. Can you maybe give a bit more information on that?
That's not the case. Our foster campaign remains, and you'll see big banners that go around, and it's at different places within the authority. So we are recruiting foster carers. What we're asked to do and charged to do as local authorities is that you don't have a number of different placements for young people. So if there's an emergency, you try and place them as best you can. And it may mean that there's 3 children that you have to place. You may have 3 individual placements, but actually is that the best thing for the family? Or do we look out with Midlothian to place the 3 children in one place? So we've got that double-edged sword of you try to move a child once because of the trauma, and then you're also trying to recruit, within Midlothian. Our recruitment remains across Midlothian. We are recruiting foster carers. Some only want to come in to do respite care. Some want to come in to do foster care. I think I reported at one point we had reduced the age of our foster carers because we've got a lot of foster carers who are now retiring. Or indeed, some of our foster carers have been deregistered because modern foster care is different from if you started 30 years ago with just a kind heart. Now there's a lot of requirements on foster carers. So it's ongoing. There's an ongoing recruitment campaign. We've got ongoing staff doing that. We'll link with East Lothian and do training, and there's a new preparation group that starts in September. So we've got prep groups that go on during the year, so people are interested. They come to a prep group. It might not be for them, but that's fine. At least we've offered them the opportunity.
This is maybe a kind of awkward, daft question, but the Family Resilience Project, given that we're at a position where we're scaling down the support to the first 3 families, is there any intention, or is it possible, to prepare any kind of analysis of that project that would indicate, how much we've spent on it and what the returns are? Now, I understand that, the outcomes are really difficult to measure because you don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. But is there anything that I'm just thinking from a scrutiny point of view, how we would get into the nitty-gritty of that? Is it possible to do a really detailed analysis of how successful that is? I also understand what you're saying there about moving on to the middling tariff, if you like, family, that you've got more scope of being maybe able to assist in some of the higher end ones that we've been working with up to now. So I can understand why you're doing that. Again, that will probably be just as difficult to measure. But
we have had the project externally evaluated. So we have some figures that would be nominal figures. So 17 children going into foster care at 20,000 on average per child would be, come on, where's the maths people among us? A lot of money. So we've got that. Then you take, if anybody has been Kevin's service in terms of having to have the people removed from their home, so you've got those figures. So we have a lot of nominal figures that we could give you to show financial success, but that doesn't talk about the well-being of a child and the impact on them. So, a child being able... A child being able to remain within their own community, what does that say to them? You know what I mean? Because we're talking about, you know, that there isn't foster carers that can take on this amount of children. You know, a parent who whose child was out at 9:30 at night and is 7 years old, you know, speaking to family support worker, the family support worker saying, actually, that's not appropriate. You know, so working alongside the parent to say, well, where is he? Who are his friends? Let's go and walk around the estate. Let's find him. And then working with that father to take on responsibility for his child that is really not appropriate. So there's a lot of really good work going on. You know, in terms of exclusions, we can talk about the cost of a child being excluded from a school, you know, from a community, you know, done out with foster care placement. So we do have monetary values, but there's also the well-being values. I can forward you the external report. It comes with a kind of health warning that the report to me was a wee bit disappointing, that it did talk about processes too much, and it wasn't about the processes. It was, for me, it was about the impact. So it was saying the Family Resilience Project, some staff are based in Pennycook, some staff are based in Dalkeith. They need to be in one place. They need to be managed by one manager. That wasn't the point of this. It was about the approach. It was about us working differently. It was about us being fleet of foot. It was about an issue. My child's missing. What do I do? Well, you get out off your backside and you get out and look for him. You know, so I'll send you the report, but it comes with a warning that it does talk a lot about process as opposed to what we wanted, the nuts and bolts. But I can do that.
Okay, any other questions? Mary, I just want to actually touch on the investigation into historical child sex abuse. And one of the things it says there just at the start was talking about the sheer resource that's going to be needed between the police and the councils. I'm going to say, should there be any allegations in Midlothian, I'd be really surprised if there aren't, because we had numerous care homes like Nazareth, Midfield and Blanarg and that, who have been subject to, certainly Nazareth has been subject to a few allegations in the past. How are we going to address that? Are we looking to see whether or not that there's a need for a core lump sum of money there to bring in that experience? Because this isn't just about a small investigation. This is about having to find historical documents. You're really looking for somebody who has knowledge of how records were kept, you know, where they would be likely to find that kind of information. And not just with the council, with the police, is going to pull away some of the most experienced staff that we could possibly have. And probably, I'm sitting thinking here, is there maybe a few staff that have been retired a couple of years ago that we might want to consider looking and say, well, would we bring them back on to carry out that bit of work? And I'm thinking the same with the police. They're going to be looking at some of the most qualified detectives in that aren't just going to be trying to source the documents, but going through the documents to see whether or no or what has happened. Has there been any sort of co-working with the police to look to see whether we need a finite resource available? Is there another way that we're looking to work it and say, well, if we perhaps didn't have somebody with that experience who was used to and would know where to find information in the 60s, how it would be kept, who would be where it's most likely to be? Have we looked at anything along the sort of lines? Because I would expect that it would be a huge drain and resource. And then once you've got that information, you've then got the drain to see, well, what's actually relevant, and you know, who then decides what's relevant for the council to hand over to the police for investigation. Again, it's going to draw, even for the legal side, I would imagine, quite a considerable amount of work away for.
At this stage, we don't know what we don't know. However, what we do know is youngsters are entitled to their records when they leave care. So youngsters have been contacting us for access to their records. And I know that it can take one member of staff a week to retrieve the records, not only retrieve the records, but then you have to redact them. So if it says Mary got into a fight with Derek Milligan, and Ian Johnson was involved and whatnot. You have to redact the Ian Johnson, the Derek Milligan, Mary got into a fight. So you have to go through sentence by sentence, every document. So you're talking about documents from their hearing reports, you're talking about documents from the foster carers or residential care or whatever. So you're right in what you say, that the person that would be retrieving the documents and the person that was having to redact the documents before they were given over, it's going to be a huge resource. And we know that in terms of the youngsters that are asking for the records now, we have a rise in that, the requests for subject access requests. So it is going to be big for the authority, both in terms of legal, in terms of document retrieval, in terms of being able to pass over the documents, and then what happens from there, for that person. The worst thing, I think, for us at the moment is a young person demanding a subject access request, and it goes through Ian's team. They wanted their subject access request. And we retrieve the documents, which are like this, and then we send it to them, or we ask them to come in and pick them up. You actually need somebody to sit down with them and go and say, here are the documents, but because that's that child's history, and if somebody's written something, in poor practice 30 years ago, something really unkind, a worker writing, Mary was totally out with control, she behaved badly, or some of the stuff you read, in terms of practice from years ago is not nice. And your young person gets that document at a weekend, your already vulnerable young person gets a huge chain of documents that really says not nice things. One of the things I read was, it was a 3-year-old, he's a snotty kid and not particularly attractive. Can you imagine, you've gone through the care system, you've not had a particularly good experience, and then you read right at the very start, somebody has made a judgment on you that, right, at the very start. So for me, it's about they don't get the subject access requests. It's not that we don't want them to get them. It's about they don't get them without having a bit of support put in place. Do you know what I mean? That somebody's there kind of to talk through, remember this was 30 years ago, or this was 20 years ago, or it's not the practice we would do now, but we've moved on from that. But, we have to be careful that all of these reports are children's journeys, children's lives.
But I think the factor I was wanting to get at is if we do see a demand for that rising, which you've said it already is, and it can go for a slight rise to an avalanche quite quickly, that's going to pull away some of the most valuable resources we have, and especially in children's families. And what I'm very keen here to make sure is that we're covering the back door, that because we're pulled away to that we didn't become vulnerable somewhere else. And it's to make sure that we have something in place. Need we to use it? Because the council's a very slow boat and can take a long time to turn round, and it's just to make sure that we actually have actions in place that would allow officers to bring people in to support. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mayor. Okay, communities and education, Ian?
Yep. Communities and economy side. Probably just take you through almost what the agenda is on the front page of the document, because of the significant issues. City deal. The City deal submission by the 6 authorities jointly will be made on Friday. That's the submission to Scottish Government and to the UK Government. It's not. It's a milepost in the process. It's not the bid and here it is and it's sort of success or failure. The aim of the submission on Friday is fairly high level. It's detailed as well. It's got a lot of backing for it, but it's essentially setting out the stall for seeking a city deal with the two governments. And the prime reason for having to do it at this time rather than later in the year is because the aim would be to get Edinburgh City Region mentioned in the Chancellor's statement, his autumn statement at the end of November, early December. And that's a critical milestone for the region if we're going to see Westminster buying into the City deal. The support from Scottish Government, but the Westminster end is critical as well. In terms of the money involved, it's about £1 billion of public government money coming in, which should aim to lever in something like 3 billion or so of private investment income as well on top of that. And it's aimed at step-change improvements in relation to infrastructure, so roads, rail, bridges, etc. But also digital as well. Digital infrastructure is critical there. Skills, innovation, qualifications, productivity improvements, so that two things happen. One, there is increased economic development and economic growth, but also there's a clear aim to see reductions in inequalities in terms of welfare, income, qualifications. So it's a package. What will be happening is that whilst that initial bid is sitting with the two governments, then the 6 councils will continue to work fairly intensively along with their consultants, Ernst & Young, or EY as they're now called, on a whole range of activities in relation to a number of work streams. And each council has actually been allocated a particular work stream to lead on. And in the case of Midlothian, that's the innovation, thing called boosting productivity work stream. So this will be a major area of work for my service, and particularly for me over the next few months, perhaps the next year or so. Just moving on, Borders Rail Line. Well, obviously this week is the opening and or the start of and then next week's the formal opening by the Queen. Really, in terms of what my service is involved with, it's not so much the opening and all of that goes with it, which is great, but where are we securing the opportunities in terms of, we talk about the railway giving much greater access to labour markets, to jobs, access to training, but it's securing that it's securing those opportunities, securing that inward investment in terms of sites, in terms of making sure we've got service sites for companies to come, attracting companies. There is now the Borders Rail consortium, if you are the Borders Rail team, have set up a website which is fairly attractive. You may want to have a look at it, which is seeking to attract or sort of raise the profile of the new Borders Rail corridor area for inward investment for tourism. We've actually got, interestingly enough, we've also got a couple of companies actually already looking to come and locate in the area on the back of the opportunities for Borders Rail. And that's a good indication, I think, of how we should be making sure we do everything we can to maximise those opportunities to bring jobs to the area on the back of Borders Rail. In terms of development planning, the Strategic Development Plan Main Issues Report, which is the first stage, is currently going through its process of public consultation, and that finishes at the end of September. But that's the plan which is still at early stages, aiming to be concluded by 2017-2018. One of the critical things about it, though, is talking about City Deal. It's the spatial strategy which links into City Deal, because City Deal is very much, as its name suggests, is for a city region. So what are the regional aspects that need to be secured? And in terms of things like growth areas, growth corridors, then the link between the Strategic Development Plan and City Deal is critical. In terms of Midlothian Local Development Plan, just to remind, that's based upon Strategic Development Plan number 1, the one that's been approved by the ministers, not on number 2. That went out for its notification period as a proposed plan, which is the advanced stage, back in June. There are some 800 representations have been received, and staff are currently going through those with a view to obviously then to bringing them forward through the normal committee and council process so that council can be advised of what the representations are and any particular amendments to the proposed plan that they may wish to make. All being well, the examination by Scottish Government reporters should be in the first quarter of next year. It's worth mentioning while we're talking about Midlothian Local Development Plan is the pressure for housing is now building pretty severely. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this council area of Midlothian has an effective land supply, and I think that we could make a robust rebuttal of an attempt to, on the part of developers, to work out with the development plan system to try and put in hostile applications for sites in this area. However, it is the case that a number of house builders have got applications in for sites which are shown in the Midlothian Local Development Plan, but which are still the subject of objection and which are still will need to be the subject of consideration at the local plan inquiry. However, we now have developers threatening on a regular basis to try and go for what they call Section 47 appeals. And really this is a product of the fact that the market has picked up so much that Midlothian is very marketable, and that's the sort of pressure which I had expected to come. I think we can be very robust in how we defend that, and quite frankly Scottish Government should be saying to all of these people, you need to work your way through the development plan system because the council has a well-developed and well-advanced local development plan, and the local plan inquiry is where you should be taking your case. But we shall see. But it's just to say that could bring us into dealing with planning inquiries, which would not be welcome, and that is very resource intensive. In terms of the European Leader funding, then we've just submitted, literally in the last few days, to meet the end of August deadline, jointly with East Lothian Council, we've submitted the new bid for the Tyne-esque area, which is the two council areas. That's funding of 3.4 million over 5 years for community projects and community activity, and that's governed by a local advisory group which is appointed or selected and works through, and that's jointly with our colleagues in East. Couple of things to mention then briefly. Just while we're on East Lothian, then we're still working towards the integration of trading standard services between Midlothian and East Lothian. There are a great many benefits which would arise from that, but that's still something which is in preparation and obviously would need governance and sign off at the appropriate time. Finally, just to focus on town centres, then in terms of Gore Bridge, then there's been good progress in terms of the conservation area regeneration scheme, and we're hoping that we may well be able to bring in additional public realm improvements on the back of funding from Borders Rail Line funding. So the aim is to try and boost Gore Bridge with further with that. At Pennycook, you'll see that the Business Improvement District ballot was favourable, was successful, and it was reported to Council back in June. I think there's a basis upon which to say, well, that's the first stage in trying to do something further at Pennycook, because if there's that level of interest and support from local businesses, can we look to build upon that with other funding opportunities that might come forward, and that's something to keep in mind. At Newton Grange, I think there's still opportunities there in relation to the site where the church is, the interests of the Castle Rock Housing Association, and also potentially what might happen to the range of council property there. There may well be opportunities, and again, there may well be opportunities for Borders Rail Line funding to come into play. But I just mentioned that in passing. There's nothing with certainty on that, but I just think in terms of town centres, we need to be looking at opportunities everywhere to see what we can do to try and boost town centres. In terms of the remainder of the report, obviously there's detail on on things, most of which is on target. There are a few that are not, and I'm happy to respond on those. But, Chair, probably leave it there and happy to take questions.
Thanks, Ian. Questions? Ian?
Thank you, Chair. I must say, every time that drill goes off, it reminds me of an episode of The Vicar of Dibley. A couple of things on this. One is the Edinburgh Region City deal. Now, it still seems pretty vague to me. I've looked, there's a wee video clip, I don't know if you've seen it, they've produced, accelerating growth. It doesn't really tell you anything apart from a few statistics. And the theme seems to be growing the knowledge economy, which sounds good from our point of view, particularly at the Bush, and that's what I wanted to ask a question on, because I noticed at the top of page 72, working with Transport Scotland and others to ensure expansion at the Easter Bush employment education area is not constrained by lack of essential infrastructure, and that, as Transport Scotland has mentioned, includes presumed transport infrastructure. Just like to ask how we'll ensure that is sustainable transport structure, and it's not the same as we've tended and other authorities have tended to do in the past. Another thing which I think Derek probably have a great deal of interest in is that having published the neighbourhood plan for Bonnyrigg and Poulton Hall, within that there was quite a strong emphasis amongst the local residents for improved bus services in certain areas. Now yesterday we had the shock announcement that the number 49 bus is going to go down from every 15 minutes to every 30 minutes, and a few curtailment of other services locally. Now, we're going to lose a good measure of confidence in the neighbourhood planning process if we say that one of the objectives of the neighbourhood plan is to try and help improve all sorts of services, not just the ones that the council provides, but to act as intermediaries, if you like, with organisations like Lothian Buses. And I do appreciate that we have very, very little leeway over what they do. But if people see the neighbourhood plans just come up and we've just lost half our bus service, what can we do to try and help address that situation?
Just start with transport at the Bush. Yeah, the pointed issue, and I'll come on to broaden this out, but the pointed issue is that we obviously look to see the Bush as such a substantial opportunity for continued growth in a sector which is really booming. And it's important for our link to the university, to the Roswell Institute, the veterinary schools, and the opportunities at the Technopole, the biocampus, etc. So, and additional land allocated for that sort of development. In terms of the infrastructure to support it, the one item which is concerning is the accessibility by road, but particularly to the A702. The A701 provides difficulties because it is becoming increasingly congested and therefore unattractive. The aim through the local plan, as you know, is to show a road, a new relief road, which would take the traffic, the road traffic. It would leave the existing A701 with much more opportunity, local access of course, but primarily public transport, cycling, so it provides that much sort of safer, probably easier route in terms of those who want alternatives to the car. It also means that, for example, the university put a fair amount of resource into bus links between the campus at the university and the city centre, and it would assist that as well. So in terms of that relief road, although in one sense it almost is counterintuitive because you're building a road, traffic tends to, as you know, rise to the amount of to the road capacity you allow. Actually, as a package, I think it should make a difference. Linking to the A702, so that's a helpful. Linking to the A702 is also critical because Transport Scotland have the whip hand, if you like, in saying whether they're going to allow further development at the Bush or whether they're going to stymie that on the basis that they consider that the impact on their trunk road is unacceptable. So getting a link through to the A702 in one of two ways: either spur it off the new A701 link from roundabout Seafield Mill up to a new junction on the A702, or improvement of the Bushmains junction. But that's quite critical because you've got the cottages there. It's not an easy one to do. And I suppose what we're saying here is, let's not sit back, wait for the planning applications and then scratch our heads when we're getting objections from Transport Scotland. Let's work with the East Bush Development Board, which we set up a couple of years ago, highlight that as an issue, ensure that the likes of the university and others are lobbying Transport Scotland, in effect, along with ourselves, to say, do not have a situation in which you're going to be in the dock, basically stopping us from collectively from seeing this area expand. So it's just highlighting it as a critical issue. But it's not, I agree with you, it shouldn't be an easy way of saying, let's just continue with a high emphasis on the mode of transport being private car. It's to try and have a package to avoid that. In terms of bus services, I mean, it comes down to some, it is about what neighbourhood planning is about. Because neighbourhood planning is a product of community planning, and it's an aim to try, obviously I'm saying what you already know, but I mean, it's in trying to ensure there is a broad base of community engagement in identifying the things that hopefully really matter to communities. And of course it crosses, because it's the community planning end of things, it crosses over a whole range of agencies, not just the council. To some extent the council's there to try and promote it and to try and coordinate it. I agree, I mean, it's always the difficulty with these action programmes is you can set yourself up for a fail here. I suppose it's better to put it in the list. If that's what the community are coming forward and saying, let's put it in. Let's also then ensure that we focus our resources as best we can to ensure that we are able to put pressure on the bus company. I know we can't, we haven't got the executive powers to do that, but in a sense, if we're saying, look, to the company, there is a broad base of concern and support for a level of service, which is what we'd expect here for a growing community of Bonnyrigg. Maybe better than having nothing to do. And it's a question of how we manage expectations. I agree. The whole neighbourhood planning process is about managing expectations. And we won't always get it right, but hopefully the latest one for Bonnyrigg is a basis for trying to do that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Ian, I have a couple. Want to follow up for Ian's question there, and it is on the neighbourhood plan and stuff. I mean, it's not going to be a kind of failure. I mean, if you set aside all the orchestrated stuff that was at the neighbourhood plan with Bonnyrigg, there were three big issues. One was transportation, one was the doctors, and one was parking. They were the three sort of areas that people had concerns about. The police do away with traffic wardens and parking gets worse. The doctors went away for you can't get an appointment at all, you can only get a phone call now, against what the community seems to be rising. And we had meetings with Lothian buses to talk about trying to improve the bus services, and they cut the service by 50%. And the council has done hee-haw about any of it. When I asked Carol Vanters yesterday, has the council complained? Will the council be complaining? No. And you just sit and wonder why the community goes through all this nonsense when the reality is it's just about writing a piece of paper and nothing happens at the back of that.
I suppose I'd comment by saying that, I mean, these public bodies are accountable. So if you've got here a structured process of engagement, and I think this plan sets it out reasonably well as to show what's been done, this is something to put to public funded bodies to say, this is clearly the expressed will of this community. What are you as community planning partners and public bodies doing to respond to that? I mean, earlier on the agenda, there's an item in relation to the Inspector of Constabulary asking about reactions in terms of the police. Well, in terms of if there's a view coming from the local community about a particular aspect of policing, that public body surely is accountable and responsible for at least identifying why they're not able to accede to what the local community is saying.
The problem is that they're just hiding, and certainly under Lothian buses, they quite simply hid behind the commercially sensitive information and refuse to pass it out. We are talking about a company who, sorry, I'm going to end up digressing here, where in meetings past have indicated that this was a growing service, and then suddenly when they seem to have trouble delivering the service and need buses to go to another area, suddenly decide that the numbers didn't add up, but aren't willing to tell you what the numbers are. I'm kind of lost with that. Ian, another area that I think that I think we need to explore, and that is something I have got a lot of concern about, and that is about trying to protect what's left of the town centres. And I think that the horse is bolted when it comes to actually trying to bring them back to the vibrant town centres of years ago, but trying to protect what's left of them. And there's not an awful lot of towns that have got any town centres. But one of the areas that has been clearly identified that need some provision for retail was the sort of Gorebridge, Newton Grange area, the area across there. We were looking at the need for a large retail unit. What effect then is going to, and what actions are we going to take to try to see if we can deliver that? Because I would have thought the fact that you've given Mayshade a certificate of lawful use for retail is going to have a serious adverse effect on any commercial decision, any operator, whether it be Asda or whatever, to place a large retail unit in that area if the Aldi application goes ahead. And I've got to say, we're having a certificate of lawful use, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to halt. What actions are you going to take to try to attract a major retail unit to the areas?
Well, you're right in as much as there is only a certain amount of retail capacity in any particular area, and the market will, in a sense, be driven by that. I mean, just to take a couple of examples. Well, for example, I mean, I'm pretty aware that there was interest from Asda in relation to the site in Gorebridge, which was, but once the Asda had secured their consent at Straighton, then that interest fell away. So it just shows how companies can think in those terms. In relation to the certificate of lawfulness on Mayshade, I mean, that's simply a planning decision which is almost an inevitability, because if the nature of the consent that's previously given means that there's an established use and it's not been controlled by any particular controls put on at the time of the planning consent, then there's almost an inevitability a certificate of lawfulness will be granted. That's different from, that's only one thing. Whether somebody who's got a site with a certificate of lawfulness for retail will then be able to take that forward into a large retail unit is another matter, because it's only one factor in the consideration. But it's relevant, I agree. In terms of the local plan, yes, it is showing that there is, in our view, sufficient demand or capacity for a fairly sizable retail store, convenience store, in the Newton Grange, Gorebridge area to serve that. And I think Gorebridge residents have long expressed the view that that's something that they're keen on. It will be to some extent the market which will drive that. The planning authority can only identify the site and identify the opportunity. It really is up to the operators, and it'll, it used to be one of the big four. Now it's the other two as well are into the frame. So we'll see what comes from that. But beyond that, in terms of what we're saying is that there is that capacity there in the Newton Grange, Gorebridge area. There's also capacity such that the effect of that on existing stores or existing shops in those two centres at Newton Grange and Gorebridge is, the assessment is there is sufficient capacity so they will not be adversely affected. But in terms of any application coming forward, it does need to show some form of retail assessment, as will any application in relation to Mayshade Centre, as to just what the impact is on existing centres. That's part of government policy and our own policies here in Midlothian.
Okay. Is there anybody any other questions or anything? Ian, just the very last one that I have for you is the two off-target statuses that you have at the very end of your paper, page 90, and it's on the percentage of food establishments subject to food control inspections. They're off target, and what you say in LP 108 is that you done 71% for them out of time, 15 remain to be done. Staff remain below establishments, so existing staff have prioritised higher risk. Is the staff below establishment through sickness, through budgetary cuts, through somebody leaving? And can you give some details how you've prioritised shops and what is the low priorities?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. In terms of the reason for it is staff turnover, and we've actually had 3 or 4 people move on, and we had to recruit. I'm glad to say we're just about back up to strength now in the last couple of weeks, which is good. In relation to inspection of premises, probably just reassure members straight away, there are not premises out there that have not been inspected that are doing things that are a danger to the public, in our estimation. Virtually all premises are inspected, and I'll answer this. I'll talk about the other bit in a minute. Virtually all premises are inspected on time. Sometimes it's a day or 2 later than would have been expected, but there's a window when they're inspected, and they're all inspected. Those are inspected. What tends to happen is faults can fall into 2 categories. There are ones which are a definite risk to the public, a public health risk. They're dealt with straight away. So any breaches there are dealt with straight away. We're right onto those. There may be other things, for example, whereby the ceiling needs painted or there's a bit of structural work needs doing, which is not going to damage anybody's health as such, but it's work that needs to be done by the proprietor. There are a few premises that we regard as lower priority, and I'll just give an example. Boots would be one. As you know, in Boots you can buy packets of sandwiches, etc. They're pre-packed, delivered to the premises. What we will do there is we will probably send them on an annual basis or more regularly a questionnaire to say, have your practices changed? Are you preparing food on the premises or anything? If it's not the case, we probably won't go and inspect them. We'll be focusing our resources on those where particularly there's food being prepared on the premises, fresh food, and then being sold to the public. So that's just an explanation of where we are. So it's showing off target. But if anyone's asking the question, does that mean the public are at risk from food contamination or other problems? No, they're not.
Okay, no other questions? Okay, Ian, thank you. Move on to the last item for this morning, as item 3 is education. Grace?
Thank you. This Q1 report for education, we're focusing on improving attendance, positive destinations, and also pupil progress in primary school performance. And for the purposes of this report, we're using the P1 and P7 data because we reported on the other year groups in previous reports which were summarised in Q4. In terms of positive destinations, we also provided a thorough report to August Council outlining the improvements in our positive destinations and also reporting on the work of the new Developing Scotland's Young Workforce Board here in Midlothian. We've also analysed all of the trend data related to children who have not moved into positive destinations, and what that shows us significantly is that there's a pattern of non-attendance with those particular young people. So we've focused over the last couple of months on looking very in a detailed way at attendance within our secondaries and within our primary schools. We know that attendance within our secondary schools fell not just in terms of this quarter compared to last year's quarter, but also over the course of the year. Now, although there were some trend information related to exam leave, because as you know in secondary schools, because the exam system has changed, children no longer get exam leave over the month of May. So our S4 and S5 pupils who are not sitting an examination, so if they're following National 3 or National 4 courses, do actually attend school. So when you look closer at the May data, you see that attendance has fallen, so that affects the pattern overall. We're also, John Trinent and myself, reviewing attendance procedures because we want to intervene really early on. So we're going to be scrutinising attendance statistics month by month so that we have that early intervention approach, because we know when we're looking at those children who have fallen into negative destinations and we're not managing to get them into employment, they've fallen into a pattern of not having a routine overall. So we know if we can intervene within a month or two, getting them back in to school early on, we know that we can make a difference on our positive destinations overall. Equally so, we know that the basics of reading, writing and maths are important, and when we've analysed the trend data for those who are not in positive destinations, we know that they've also not achieved a basic level of maths or English qualification at National 3. So we're looking at our standardised test information in a detailed way, and in particular looking at the end of P1 data. We now know, and myself as Head of Education knows, the particular children in which we need to have significant interventions really early on, because we know if we can intervene in P1, 2 and 3 to help them read, they can then access the wider curriculum further on in their schooling. Equally so, by the end of P7, we want to increase the reading age at the end of P7, so that's going to be a target moving on, because we know that those youngsters where their reading is slightly below level, if it's below the 9.5 years, they then begin to fall away from education, particularly through the middle of S2. So we know if we have significant interventions from the P7 into S1, we can prevent those children falling out of education later on. So that's why there's a detail there around attendance and also pupil progress. In terms of emerging challenges and risks, the Improving Positive Destinations, we've set ourselves a very ambitious target there in terms of school leavers of 95% positive destinations, but there's also changes to the reporting of positive destinations which will catalogue in terms of 16, 17, 18 and 19-year-olds. We know in Midlothian that we have a low uptake into higher education, and we know that that will actually have an impact in terms of our overall figures for 16 to 19-year-olds, and the new measure is actually called a participation measure. One of the other risks moving forward is also the commitment to meet the teacher numbers, and that's the double log, which we are committed to achieving the 4.2 in terms of teacher numbers. However, there is an emerging risk in terms of teacher numbers across the whole of Scotland, and if you may have read in the press in terms of the 7 attainment challenge areas, Glasgow in particular, as part of their attainment challenge, are trying to recruit more teachers, and the concern is if 1 or 2 local authorities try to recruit more teachers than are necessary, they would take them away from other areas. So that's something that we've got a week-by-week monitoring to make sure that we're ahead of the game there, but also we have been employing a pool of permanent supply teachers, knowing that when you get into the difficult winter months, it's very difficult to get supply, so we want to ensure we've got our own Midlothian teachers here. One of the other risks, and you may also have been aware at the National Improvement Framework that's been published just yesterday, the Education Bill, of which we also presented a paper to August Council. Moving forward, you will begin to see some changes in terms of national testing, and that we think at this stage will be the use of standardised assessment data. That's something we use in Midlothian in terms of our tracking anyway, but there will be significant increase in terms of scrutiny over attainment data for P1, P4, 7 and S3 at a national level. And the other terms of moving forward with CMIS, the implementation of the named person, and we already spoke before at August Council on the limitations in terms of meeting that deadline. In terms of some of the targets you'll see that are red, probably given myself a more difficult job, but we're committed to achieving better than our previous best. So we've looked at trend data over time, and we're trying to ensure that our target that we aim for is actually better than any target that we've ever previously attained. So you will see that some may be slightly off target, but we want to ensure that by setting a target, we are actually achieving better than we've ever achieved previously. So although those targets are ambitious, we know that they need to be for attendance and in terms of standardised testing data if we're really going to achieve overall our big ambition of the 95% positive destinations.
Thanks, Grace. Questions? Comments? Jim?
I think just to say, given that most of this was actually before the council last week, I've not really got any questions to ask. It's pretty much covered then.
Yeah, if I can remember what my question was. Yeah. I was just thinking something that could help perhaps. The question really was, is it a long-term issue with the shortage of teachers? in Midlothian as much as Scotland. But thinking along those lines, I was thinking that if it is a long-term issue, maybe we could help positive destinations as well as that issue by encouraging our school leavers to maybe go into teaching, because they're more likely, once they've qualified, to come back to a place they're familiar with. If it's a short-term issue, then I understand that. But if it's a longer-term one, maybe it's something we should consider.
I'm not sure so much if it's a longer term issue in terms of teachers in general. We tend to in education go through peaks and troughs related to that. Interestingly though, in Midlothian, because we've been investing in visible learning, just on the first 2 in-service days we trained over 520 teachers in visible learning. We're finding that our level of applications coming into Midlothian have increased as a result of newly qualified teachers knowing that if they come to Midlothian they receive robust continuing professional development, and we've also extended that to the leadership programme. So I think we've benefited from investing in the teacher in the classroom, where some local authorities are finding that their applications for first stage teaching posts have dipped a bit.
One quick supplementary one, I think, on the named person. It's not something I can get too enthusiastic about. I feel it was a bit of a gimmick myself, but that's my personal view. I just have a worry about the pressure this is going to have on staff. Now, I don't know a great deal about it, but if it's done through the school, through the education system, it sounds to me like the people who are going to be the named person are going to be head teachers, people that the youngsters are familiar with. Do you know any more about that and how much work it's going to put on our resources?
In terms of the named person, while it's legislative, so we have to implement it, our schools have done this for years, either in primary through head teachers and at secondary through guidance. It was the head teacher in secondary had the pastoral care, but it was devolved to guidance. So we have done this. The new bit about the named person is that instead of police reports and children's wellbeing reports going to social work, they would actually go to schools. So we have to do a lot of training with teachers not to panic when they get a police report that there's been a domestic violence incident at the weekend. Mum and Dad were arguing, but the children actually weren't there. They were at Granny and Grandad's. However, there's an issue there if the children are witnessing domestic violence. Was this a one-off and it'll never happen again, or is this constant, in people's lives? So there's a lot of training to be done around that and how we manage the number of referrals that go to a school. So you could imagine there'll be areas where there would be a higher volume of referrals than there would be normally, but we're working with schools on that. The issue at the moment is health. So health will be responsible for until the child goes to school. So either 4.5 or 5.5, health will have that responsibility. Now, across the board, there is a shortage of health visitors in Scotland, and the legislation says it's devolved to a health visitor as opposed to a health team. So they've got issues that they're looking at the moment, and then the issue we've got is how do we transfer information from health to CMIS? CMIS is not up to date in terms of how it's going to manage the information, and the Scottish Government's been assured that that CMIS will be ready in February. I hear my doots, but there you go, I'm not cynical. So it's just about this information, how we pass that information on. Children's information was always passed on from health to school, and it was through the school nurse, so the school nurse would hold the information, but it's about how that information is held electronically. There is no doubt it will have an impact on administrative staff, because if a head teacher has to call a multi-agency meeting. However, we're now looking at our family support service having stage 2 meetings with our head teachers, and there's been a pilot in Pennycook that's worked very well, and we're rolling out that pilot to this side of the authority. So it's worked very well. So Dalkeith's had stage 2 meetings in schools where they sit down, talk about the youngsters that are having concerns, but also talk about the referrals that have come in. So a lot of it will not be new, but the legislative requirement is different. That's the difference that we have to make sure. And also the systems, our electronic systems, have to talk to each other. But there's a lot of work to be done. We day and daily get emails from Scottish Government of how are you doing this, how are you doing that, Part 19, Part 11, so there's lots of work to be done from the Scottish Government end about guidance. We're being very proactive that we want to be there, advising the Scottish Government of this is what's happening and this is what's happening in Midlothian, because we would rather be in the tent than somebody telling us what we need to do. But we have done GIRFEC since 2008 in Midlothian, but now it's legislative. So a new head teacher coming in from another local authority may not have been as aware, but our head teachers that have been here a long time will be very aware of the work that's ongoing. We have a GIRFEC development officer in education. We have Dory MacDonald, who's leading on the implementation of GIRFEC, and we have Alistair Short in health. So we're working together on that at the moment and working with our head teachers.
Kenny.
Thanks, Chair. Just to touch back on positive destinations, but how HE performs relatively weakly within that. And obviously there's quite well publicised recently about Scotland falling behind and levels of grants for students from poorer backgrounds and all that. So it looks like it's going to be an important thing going forward for us to get right, particularly with our wards of high deprivation and that sort of thing. A constituent came to me a couple of weeks ago, and I had a bit of discussion with officers about the Children's University that's being run at QMU, and I had some really good information, but it was just to see if that was something that you thought over the next year you'd be getting more involved in, or if you thought that there was some drawbacks that we should be aware of that, because I've only really had it one side from the gentleman that brought it to my attention, but it seemed quite good in terms of lifting horizons and aspirations.
No, I would completely agree, and I think you'll find more information about that coming through in the new education bill as well, not just in terms of the traditional courses at university, but widening the access, and certainly the academies model that we've been involved in provided a really important stepping stone, and it allows children, I think, to realise that there are different routes actually into university, so certainly, yeah.
Can I just say, sorry?
Yeah.
We actually went to a graduation. I think perhaps the gentleman that's been in touch with you is well versed, and he may have had an article in the Advertiser today. I don't know your constituent, but it may well be this person. What we wanted to do was start it off and learn from that. And we have a number of schools that are taking part, and a number of children graduated in July from the university. So it will continue. But again, it's about starting even earlier than that. So what are we doing with our now year 2, or our entitled 2s? What are we doing in our early learning, to foster ambition, with our parents? And again, as we say, the academies. So it's a whole through point. We have a very enthusiastic parent, and it's about the parent would like to go into the schools to talk about the Children's University, but the Children's University are aware that that's not his role. It's our role to talk about that. And the parent has a particular role, our parent in Midlothian has a particular role he would go and do the evaluations of so if a youngster does 5-a-side football, how many credits does that give you? If he regularly plays, he regularly turns up. What about a dance group? So what is it they do in the dance? How does that equate to... So that's the particular role that parent has, and not... He's not the advocate for it. We are the advocate for it. And it's about how we progress that. One of the things one of our teachers in Dander Hall was saying was she would like to see our 5-year-olds starting doing these things, because they do go to pre-brownies, pre-cubs, they maybe go to mini football, mini TEDs, all of that sort of thing. So all of that can also contribute. So it's about how we grow all of that.
Joe?
Yeah, go back to the named person. I attend the Young Carers Festival every year, and I was there about a month or so ago. And as the name suggests, it's young people looking after their peers or their parents, and they are very much looking forward to having a named person to help to look after them for a change. Just to assure Councillor Baxter that some people are looking forward to and see that they do see the point of having a named person for every child in Scotland.
Councillor Baxter, what a surprise.
I'm not opposing it. I'm not opposing it at all. It's just that I wanted to be clearer what exactly it is. But as Mary said, it sounds like it's what we have been doing. It's just being formalised a bit more and making it absolutely clear. And I'm 100% in favour of that. No objection.
Jim?
I think it's also to do with the effectiveness, and I think that we're right to question how effective it's going to be at the end of the day, because it's quite clear it's going to consume resources. It's going to consume resources in areas that least can afford resources to be consumed. You know, areas I represent, I can see there being particular problems there. If staff are being diverted away to deal with issues like this, then you know it's going to potentially cause problems. So I've certainly got doubts about it, and not just for the education side, but in particular children and families. Where, as Mary was saying there, the health workers, the load that's going to, the burden that's going to put on them, and if they're doing that, they can't be elsewhere. You know, so there are issues with it, and I think that part of the thing, I think personally, I think it's been rushed through a bit too quickly. I think you can see from comments, and I didn't raise it because she wasn't here, but Joan's comments there about concerns about how quickly it's being pushed through, and the lack of information. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I just think it's maybe being rushed a bit too much.
Yeah, I tend to echo that. I don't think anybody has any concerns about young people who need somebody to touch off. I think the big concern here is that when you throw the net that wide, somebody's going to slip through, and the reality is we should be concentrating, Joe, on the people you're talking about. They're the people who should be getting the big lift, and the minute you throw it open to everybody's child has a named person, it's what happens then is that people who in reality don't need any support, they have decent, good, healthy family support, it just diverts away work from the youngsters that you're talking about, and I think that's what everybody's concern is here.
But the thing is, convener, children that don't need to be looked after won't be looked after. There's no resources going to be involved in that because the named person will become involved. I mean, it's only the people that need to be caught. And let's face it, when we get to hear about poor bairns that are brutalised by parents, then we all hold our hands up and say, oh, no, again. I'm sorry, if this stops one bairn going through hell, then I'm all for it. And it's not just like this didn't get introduced last week. This has been going through 2-3 years now.
I'll take that on board, but also take on board if you throw the net too wide, then that's what usually happens, that a child does slip through the net that could have otherwise had a lot more time spent on them. Is there any other questions? Okay, Mary, Grace, thank you, and I'll see you all back here hopefully at 2 o'clock.